was using technology to learn. And now as we're moving forward, it's really how are we using technology to transform learning. So I thought that was a great graphic. Next slide, please. In our world, in career and tech ed, we're always about, well, what are our customers asking? What is the workforce needing? What are they requiring of our graduates to operate in a digital world? And it is just, when you start to read and you talk to our business partners, whether it's college, universities, military, employers, it is just, technology is driving a lot of current jobs and emerging jobs. And then, of course, with the pandemic, how has that impacted and where does technology fit in with that? Healthcare, for example, is just phenomenal at the warp speed that's occurring. For example, little nanochips that are designed and developed that go under the skin to be able to detect diseases, on into our automotive with artificial intelligence that's really impacting our mobility industry. And then coming from a military family myself, just the military has always been on the cutting edge of technology. So what are they looking at for folks who want to serve the country and have those skill sets for there? So as we look at what we have currently existing in career and tech ed, but also in working on that 5 to 10 year plan, what is that going to look like? Next slide, please. So if you were to walk into our current career and tech ed classrooms, labs, what should technology integration look like? Do you see traditional computer labs? Will you see STEM spaces where they're doing engineering work and projects? Will you see gaming? And I don't mean esports, I mean gaming where students are learning to program and to create animation and the backgrounds for gaming software. We see technology being used for problem solving. You know, those are the questions we want to ask when we're looking at how is technology being used effectively to move the needle. Next slide, please. So we thought that not just in the career and tech ed world, that really K-12, this would be some common language that we felt like would be helpful. This is taken from a national framework for computer science that we'll reference in a few later slides. But just to quickly go through some of these, obviously computer literacy, general use of computers and software. The board members, you all have gotten very good at using board docs and the various software for that. I'm an Excel person, I love that. And then you take it into Ms. Beckham-Varsky's world of educational technology. How are we taking those applications and applying it? And I thought there was a good example there of how an English class takes a web-based app to work together to create an essay and post it online. And then digital literacy is so important. It's the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, and create. We use a software called All Data in our automotive program. It is widely utilized in automotive dealerships. And I always enjoy observing the students. The teacher gives them a task, locate XYZ part with certain specifications that needs to go into a 52 Chevrolet Ford. It is a lot of higher end skill sets that they're using to research and narrow it down to the exact information. And as we know, a lot of technical manuals now are online with many of our occupations. Digital citizenship, do we as K-12, do we make that a priority to help our students that we're giving them the tools to utilize? Do we also teach them that, hey, there's a responsibility that comes with that? And then information technology gets into Mark's, Mr. Chauhan's and our world, where we're focusing on industrial applications. What training are we providing to help someone learn how to manage networks rather than the software to create them? And then lastly, really the creme de la creme is the computer science aspect, and it's on the academic side of a discipline with a set of scientific principles to help students learn how to solve complex real world problems, promote that higher order thinking. So all of these work together as to how are we then harnessing this to have systematic usage of technology and resources to help our students to learn. Next slide, please. So and this is maybe something that the technology committee is aware of, but as we're planning, the state of South Carolina recognized the need to start addressing some of this. And so they created computer science standards. They released the first document for K-8 in 2016. And then the next document, I believe, was released end of 2017. And basically it was start to address how are we helping our students to think in terms of computational thinking. So it's not just about the technology, but how are they using it? So these were the 5 key areas: computing systems, networks, internet, data analysis, algorithms and programming, and the impact of computing. Next slide, please. So I just included a little snippet of what one of those would look like for the high school. And then, if you will, please go on to the next slide. And there's an example for the K-8. You have access to this on the South Carolina Department of Ed website, both of the manuals, or I'll be glad to send those links to Mrs. Crosby to share as well. So in doing that, yes, ma'am, go ahead to the next slide. So when they released those standards, nothing was mandated that we had to implement those in some fashion or form based on accountability. What was mandated was a change in the types of courses that would count as a computer science graduation credit. So you have before you that list. It has to be on the approved list in order for it to count. In the past, they would use like Microsoft Word as a computer science credit, and they realized that that was not necessarily meeting those higher thinking standards. And what you see highlighted in yellow is what we currently offer here in Beaufort County. The next slide, please. So with that little backdrop, board members, this is where we see career and tech ed as far as the utilization in our services to help our students meet some of these requirements. First of all, we're offering IT related courses, and we have the exact the numbers as well as enrollments. As a result of that, many of these courses require Adobe related products, as well as Autodesk, AutoCAD. Those do not run well on the one-to-one devices. So through Perkins funding, I budget each year for higher-end laptops or computers that will work with those applications. And then as a result, we're able to positively impact the number of students who are earning that graduation computer credit. I'll give you an example. Right now we have this year 2,235 students enrolled in one or more of those CTE courses that count for their graduation credit. We have over 3,400 students enrolled in the various IT related courses. Another way that we are helping, I think, to support and promote higher thinking with technology is through our IT pathways and student certifications. Can we be better there and grow? Most definitely. But we do have students that are earning a test out similar to A+, Network Plus. So also Project Lead the Way, it's a national curriculum that's very strong in higher order thinking along the lines of math and science for Project Lead the Way, as well as at our middle schools. We have a great course that's offered at most of our middle schools called Computer Science Innovators and Makers. Great little exploratory course for students to start getting a little bit of coding and programming. We also offer at the middle schools an option is the digital literacy courses, and those standards hit on some of that digital citizenship. Students can actually earn a little certificate before they leave the class. Another area that supports the technology integration is Vex Robotics. We have that available for all grades 6 through 12. We support that through CTE funding. Again, just a great engaging activity that they're learning, and they don't know that they're programming and so on with the use of robotics. And then lastly, shout out to Dr. Stratos, Mr. Flowers, and Ms. Appleby. There's 2 major grants that a huge part of that incorporates computer science, math, and engineering technology to help with these different standards to increase our student achievement. Next slide, please. Another area I wanted you to be aware of is that for our teachers to instruct IT and computer science courses, they have to have either the IT certification licensure, and or for certain courses, they have to have that endorsement. So if I'm teaching full-blown IT courses, obviously I have to have that background, and you see that by coursework. If I'm a math certified teacher or science and I want to take the praxis, I can add the computer science endorsement, which is always encouraged. And then lastly, for those teachers teaching those 3 introductory courses, they don't have to have their full IT certification or the praxis, but they do have to successfully complete a 30-hour professional development that is approved by the state of South Carolina. So in looking at all that, yes, ma'am, go to the next slide. There are 2 to 3 huge areas that for consideration as we move forward that I know there's always been some discussion. For example, maker spaces and STEM innovation labs. First of all, what are they? And then their purposes as we look at planning. So makerspace is basically a great dedicated space for students to be able to create, invent, and learn, usually around a particular project. STEM labs promote collaboration. If you walked into some of ours with the Project Lead the Way, you should see problem-based projects ongoing around the STEM concepts. And then innovation hubs, we don't have that here in Beaufort. It's been more of an adult university concept, but I think would be worth consideration on down the road, because it's basically if someone has a business idea that is heavily involved with technology, they can use it as an incubator or an accelerator to further develop that idea. We're fortunate in our own county to have the Beaufort Digital Corridor, as well as the Don Ryan Center, that very much have a great opportunity for people to try out their new ideas with support. And we would just, as we look at the potential for these, obviously we want to look at the purpose of them. What does the design and development look like? We need to evaluate to what extent these spaces would be used to achieve. Basically, we're working on our moving student achievement. And then obviously we have to have teacher and school leadership buy-in as to how and why these types of spaces work and for whom. And if we do all that, then I believe we would be able to provide for sustainability for whatever those creative spaces would look like. Next slide, please. Another huge area that we definitely is on the career and tech ed radar is for cybersecurity, particularly here in the Low Country. We're excited to have a cyber summit coming up that several of us will be participating in. And we have several community leaders that are really wanting Beaufort to become a hub for all things cybersecurity. And there's definitely federal economic and policy initiatives that are coming down for added support to help make this happen. So as we want to support those initiatives, it's important for us to keep in mind we still need those foundational skills. And that's where the computer science way of thinking with our early grades, as well as making sure we have support for the CTE IT pathways, because we don't want to we can't just say, ninth grader, you take a higher end cybersecurity course. We want to have them take an IT fundamentals, perhaps an intro to networking, so that then when they took the cybersecurity course, they would have a better understanding of, okay, here's how I protect these networks. And then that third bullet is very important. And again, we're so appreciative in working with our IT folks. We want to have an infrastructure that maintains safe operating parameters. We don't want students to inadvertently and not maliciously to take down our school networks or even other networks. So it's important that we have intentional design and planning as to what that learning environment looks like to be able to do these cyber patriot competitions or cyber courses or camps. We are well on our way, I believe, at Well Branch Early College High School, Beaufort High School, and Hilton Head High School in the early workings of leading toward a cybersecurity focus. But again, we have work to do. Next slide, please. And then just in wrapping, moving forward, these are some considerations for further discussions. Well, in order to effectively prepare our students for the future of technology, existing technology, we need to increase the number of teachers who have a computer science licensure and certification. These would be our existing teachers who would want to add on that endorsement. And what does that look like? We want to recruit and retain highly qualified IT specific certified instructors. And we know the challenge there that occurs because they can make more out in industry. We want to build capacity and incentives for teacher awareness to effectively integrate computer science in their content areas. And this would be K-12. And then for the CTE side, how do we go about providing intentional scheduling for the progression of IT-related courses? For example, yes, we are definitely serving the need for those entry-level courses to count as a computer science credit. But if we're using all of our teachers to teach those level 1, 2 courses, and we don't have enough sections to add on those advanced IT classes, you know, how can we help to address that? And then, as I mentioned, just developing a system so that we start prioritizing computer science standards within K-12 subject areas, because the state of South Carolina, we found out, is now, they have the standards out there. Over the next 2 years, they will now be developing South Carolina framework. And along with it, we feel like there will be additional accountability that will come with that. Next slide, please. So again, I appreciate the work of this committee that you're going to be doing, because when we're evaluating hardware, software resources, you know, there's so many different moving targets and points to that. And as I mentioned, just beginning to think about that framework. And I think we all agreed, we love this quote. It says, in our digital age, computers are both the paint and the paintbrush, and computer science education creates the artist. So, you know, we really like that thought. And then just on the last slide, thank you. As far as career and tech ed, and we have great support. We're very fortunate to have support from the board down. We want to be able to integrate career and tech ed pathways with skills that are transferable. We're already working on the employability skills, soft skills aspect across all of our pathways. But what is it going to take for overall technology, particularly with business and entrepreneurial skills? What does that look like across all pathways? We want to introduce high school students to emerging occupations, as we talked about. How do we get more cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, automation, those type of exciting things that's really here. It's not on the horizon, it's here in the workforce. C is huge. How do we at the high school, well, K-12 level, expand on technological innovations within existing workforce needs where industry, the voice of industry is critical, such as our healthcare. And then obviously we can continue to ensure students are college and career ready, but particularly for those students who want to pursue an IT pathway, we want to continue to put those funding toward industry credentialing. So they walk out with stackable credentials of the A+ network, cyber, and then also continue to work with TCL and USCB for dual enrollment opportunities so that they can work toward those certificate pathways. So I'll stop there, and like I said, several of us will be glad to answer any questions you may have.
All All right, before we go to the first question, I just want to say it was an excellent, excellent presentation, as always.
Thank you, Mr. Striber.
You answered a lot of questions. All right, Ingrid.
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Stribinger, because one of the things with technology is you've got to look at every, department. You've got instructional services, you've got HR, you've got finance, you've got Kate, you've got, all these different components, bring them together and then set goals for these programs, right? Which you did. What should technology look like in the classroom? And then lay out sort of how things to obstacles. So I just think this was excellent. I think this is a model for where a lot of stuff in technology could go. My first, and I have several, David, but I'll do them one at a time and then you can interrupt. My first question is, as I've been looking at this technology conundrum, and I have a 9th grader, he's in the Project Lead the Way computer programs. I see where, the jobs are, where the college degrees are, and I want him to get more computer education. So on a personal level, is it a Kate program? Is it, because we have like AP computer sciences, and traditionally Kate sort of has been one mode, and then you have sort of these other pathways, whether it's AP or IB or arts or, different modes. Is Kate going to take the lead in technology curriculum, or is it going to be more of an instructional services?
And certainly Dr. Stratus can chime in as well as Ralph. So first of all, the Project Lead the Way at Hilton Head, well, we have it at several, Hilton Head, Battery Creek, Beaufort, really I think at all now, most of our high schools. That is just one resource that's a fairly recognized curriculum that's, I think, spot on to trying to meet those computer science standards of helping students to start learning through project-based applications, similar to what the Project Lead the Way engineering pathways have done in the past. They just 2 years ago added on the 4th level of Project Lead the Way cybersecurity, and that's where I appreciate the principal at Hilton Head that's where we're wanting to go with that, to add each year another course and hopefully another teacher to help make that happen. I would say, Ms. Boatwright, it's a collaborative effort. I think if you go back, please, Mrs. Cushenberry, to the slide that has the list of courses, if AP Computer Science were offered, then it also could meet that. Keep on going back to where we had that one. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. IB, Computer Science IB has a course along that pathway. It comes down to what teachers do you have to instruct this and where it's engaging and fun and helping the students. But Dr. Stratus, would you agree that's a collaborative approach, not just with CTE?
I would. I wanted to reframe the question. So now how will CTE, computer science, and accelerated courses integrate? And it is a collaborative approach. And Karen, you landed right on the point. It is a staffing approach in order to have, if I have the CTE educator who's taken a series of courses providing that for our students, do we have the parallel computer science person in the accelerated courses on that side of the house? So it's a combination. Yes, we do have to have a integrated model. I did in a prior school, but the larger a school, the larger opportunity of more staffing, right? As well as a larger amount of students to populate those courses. So they're not in isolation. They can be integrated, and you hit the nail on the head, Mrs. Gilbert.
Can I just follow up with that and reframe my question a third time a little bit? Because, so I got a master's degree in information management recently, right? That's one approach. I'm also doing a Google certification. Lots of tech firms are hiring right out of high school based on certification programs. So to me, there are all these programs that are just certification based, cybersecurity, Google data analyst, and they're inexpensive. And I think they would be relatively easy to run in more of a Kate type format, I guess, versus someone learning computer programming who wants to go do computer engineering at Clemson. I don't know. I'm not necessarily saying that they're different. I just don't know I'm just trying to get a sense of what's the emphasis.
I thank you for clarifying that. And first of all, can you come teach too? Because it sounds like you got an awesome background. We need you.
Yeah.
we're for both. If our students, we have a lot of students in Project Lead the Way engineering, they go on to the four-year universities. A lot of our students are taking our sports medicine, healthcare. They're going on to the four-year university. So it's not just for that technical college bound kid. So in that sense, we're trying to meet the needs for both populations.
Thank you.
Dick?
May I ask a clarification to Mrs. Gilbert, Mrs. Strippinger?
Go ahead.
Regard to Karen, on the Perkins funding, do they include Google certification as a qualifier for instructional personnel?
Is for personnel or for students?
For personnel.
We'll
Could you look into that?
yes, ma'am, we'll be glad to.
Yeah, because Mrs. Boatwright triggered that question from my side.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dick.
Okay, thank you. I'm interested in the infrastructure. And let me give you a little background. I had the opportunity to go to Microsoft a lot, visiting their headquarters and going into their rooms for coders and seeing how the coders are set up. Multiple screens. They have desks configured in certain ways so they can have paper documents and they're looking at one screen that's got the code stream, one stream that's got the application, the other screen, especially if there's a lot of graphics, will have the graphics. 3 separate computers, as many as 3, at least 2 different computers set up. And what Microsoft does is Microsoft sponsors coding competitions throughout the country. And they go to high schools, programs, and Microsoft will send some engineers and some observers down, give a prize, and then they will cherry pick the kids that do really well. They'll say, come work. And they'll give them, start them at, this was 2002, 2004, starting them at $60,000, give them an apartment and work their tails off until they're 26 and are no longer innovative. I've been to a gaming company in Thousand Oaks, California, saw the same type of setup. So if we're going to go into this as a CATE program, we need to set up industry standard configurations because we're putting kids in a real disadvantage if they have a single PC or single desktop or a desktop and a laptop. That's not what you're going to see when you go into the industry. We've got to show them that. There's fundamentally, and that's just for the coding and the gaming part. There's also the engineering part. There's also the cybersecurity part. It seems to me we need to go to where they're doing cybersecurity. How are they configured? We're ready to work on the CATE program at May River. And that program, we build that school, that CATE building there at May River, we need to build it if we're going to do a computer science, computer course there. We need to build that so that we can duplicate state-of-the-art where the kids go. And that means that we've got to send our architects, our engineers, our IT folks out to look at what's out there. Because, you know, this was 2002, 2004. I'm sure it's changed. I'm sure it's changed. So I think this is an excellent, excellent briefing. And I'm really excited about seeing where we can go. I understand from Dr. Rodriguez that he has initiating a program with TCL and USCB in the robotics field. Now that's a whole different kind of makeup of a cat room and how that's set up. That's a whole different thing. That's more hardware, software, obstacle courses for the robots to go around. If you didn't, I went to the robotics competition, the International Robotics Competition in Louisville, Kentucky, 3 years ago, when my grandson was competing as part of the Ladies Island Middle School robotics team. That's where I saw what they had versus what we had at Ladies Island Middle School. Not only the hardware, but the engineer that was there with them, the adult teacher that was there with them. We had an adult teacher there. The kids knew more about it than he did. And that's why, you know, they were not even in the ballpark at that level. It was just difference in what they had here at Ladies Island. Basically, all they had was a classroom, and they brought in stuff, but nothing else. I mean, it was very, very basic. That's not what international programs have. They are very sophisticated. So we need to go out and do some benchmarking and visit some schools that have already figured it out, and let's copy it. But Karen, this is just dynamite. I thank you so much for putting this together.
And thank you, Colonel Geyer, for recognizing the infrastructure and planning of that. You're spot on. It's definitely important.
Earl?
Colonel, going back to what you were saying, it's still basically about what it was when you saw it. My son's in cybersecurity. He did it in the military on the new cyber commands. And even in his current workplace, it's like you said, is 3 different screens, you know, that's his hub where he can interact between different programs because they have to flop between different programs. Just to plant a pin or a seed, when we look at infrastructure and we look at bandwidth and we look at the wires coming in, I talk with IT about it and I bounce it off my son all the time. One of the main reasons we use Project Lead the Way is because it's a cloud-based AWS, Amazon Web Services for the cybersecurity. It's safe. It's not hitting our network.
Right.
So in terms of protection for our network and our schools and our school district, finance, et cetera, we're not getting attacked through that.
Right.
If we go outside of Amazon Web Services, now you're looking at running separate lines to the schools with a separate server just for the types of courses that you've mentioned.
Right.
So just as the board members look at the future and the infrastructure, that's a key piece. Thank you.
Campbell?
Okay, Ms. Gilbert, do we have robotics in all our middle schools?
No, sir. We now have Project Lead the Way Gateway, the middle school courses in all of our schools, which lends to that project-based, problem-based. We were proud that Beaufort Middle School just added on. And we have an awesome new teacher at Well Branch Middle School as well. And she is very interested in adding that computer science innovators and makers course. So Ralph and I will be paying for her training to get that this summer. Since she's a brand new teacher, we didn't want to, she's going through PACE or direct, and we didn't want to add too much. But once she gets that training, then yes, sir, then we will have a gateway in all STEM courses in all of our middle schools. Automation robotics specifically for that is in, I want to say 4 of our middle schools.
And do they compete against other districts like they used to do in the past?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact,
Yes.
Well Branch Middle School used to do very well years ago, right when I first came on board. So it is our hope that once we get teachers, consistency with our teachers, particularly at the middle grades, then we'll definitely want to bring that back.
Thank you.
Before I go to you, Ingrid, I have a couple of questions, but I'm only going to ask one. There's a horizontal and a vertical aspect to this, and I'm going to kind of focus on that horizontal. And you touched on it in your thing about all our teachers should have the fundamentals. It's just like English or anything else. You have to have those fundamentals. So that's one, and then there's the vertical, which are the certificate programs, et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, what can the board do to help y'all get both of those? I mean, we can focus on this vertical thing, but the horizontal part is where I'm really focused on. How do we get broad-based, basic, fundamental understanding of computer principles and software principles through the development stuff? How can the board help you get that done? And in fact, are you the lead on that, or is Dr. Stratos who is the lead on making sure that all our teachers have a certain basic understanding, a way of thinking? Because as you know, computer science is a way of thinking, a way of approaching problems. So we need to get that integrated everywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Strubinger, for picking up on that. And Ms. Kuchberry, if you'll go to that slide on considerations, and then Mr. Flowers, if you're still with us, Nick, and then Dr. Stratus, Mr. Flowers has an excellent perspective on that we're excited about in addressing, Mr. Strubinger, what you're asking about for overall K-12. Would you like to share a little bit of our conversations, Mr. Flowers, on that?
I'd be happy to. So you really hit the nail on the head there, that computer science is more than just coding. So I think as a district, we need to really think about what's our plan of action to really address that computer science aspect of it. When we look at on a broader scale, I mean, computer science really encompasses kind of 5 core concepts. And so bringing in those 5 core concepts of how those strands can touch on all the different areas. So if I'm doing an English report, then I may want to pull in to using some form of way to communicate that out within the report, kind of like a multimedia approach there to it. So on a national scale, they've really identified 5 core concepts, and they've identified 7 core practices. And so now I think the next step for us then is really identifying what our plan of action is, and then chunking it out. So then that way we have the technology IT aspect that can support the academics aspect of bringing in the computer science concepts. So I think that, I know for me, I worked very closely with Colleen, just because she really brings that heavy tech side to my work, and then bringing the computer science side, the academics piece to it too. So really conceptualizing what does this look like, and then developing an action plan of how this really rolls out. So we're able to make sure that we're developing standards-based instruction to our computer science standards, but more importantly, just the thinking on that approach is happening in the classrooms, with the hope then that students will be able to get those industry certifications and all of that.
And who is the lead on that? Who's our champion on that? Make sure it gets done.
So, Mrs. Trivinger, right now we have a grant through the DODEA that Mr. Flowers is the lead point of contact on implementation. That a core concept of that grant is the integration of the computer science standards into our elementary schools and being able to build that capacity in our educators. So we have a slice of that happening. Part of that also bleeds into our MSAP. Outside of our division, we haven't built PD beyond those 2 grants. We're just starting that process as that's growing. My gut feeling, it'll be an extension of working from the DODEA, and SREB, the Southern Regional Education Board, some of their concepts and practices, and then being able to have the opportunity to bring more in, says we're, and I mean more experts in, says we're onboarding educators and conducting PD during the school year. We're able to cast a larger net to impact more educators.
Thank you very much. Ingrid?
Thank you. So going back to, is that me? Okay.
Yes,
Going
ma'am.
back, okay. The HR issue. I mean, we can talk about benchmarks and seeing what other schools are doing. The problem is we don't have a lot of them in the district. We're short on teachers, and now with remote work, if you're good with computers, you can make six figures pretty easy. Signing up for some of these companies that no longer require you to be in cities. So I think it's going to be a challenge. One question I have as far as that aspect is, there are a lot of people here on the island who may not be certified teachers, but would be willing to commit to teaching a class. Some are working in IT areas, and they have either the latitude to come in for one class a day, and they would see it as a giving back. And they like working with the youth and leading that next vanguard of people into their profession. Some of them are retired, but still have really relevant skills and contacts. Is there some way that we can figure out how to help get some of these people into the classroom?
That's an excellent idea, Ms. Boatwright, and I like the way you're driving that. We definitely need to look outside the box and get innovative as to how we are recruiting. And it really goes to several of our specialty area content areas. We could have some phenomenal nurses that don't necessarily want to commit to the entire day that would be willing to come in. And this is not just a problem or a challenge Beaufort County. It's several of my colleagues regionally and abroad are having the same concerns, particularly like you said, since COVID, and they can work remotely. So one of the ways that we can look at that, obviously with HR, is contract work. And also, I think the state is recognizing that they've got to change the funding formulas, first of all, for teachers who come in with specialty areas, and start to count years of work, not just years of teaching experience. That is on their radar. But then, as I said, looking at just how Dr. White and SPED, they contract out psychologists. They contract out, a little different scenario, of course. But I like the way you're thinking of trying to get innovative as to how that would perhaps bring in some really good talent into our schools, just not on a full-time basis. So we definitely will pursue that, ma'am.
Thank you. And David, I have one more question, but I'm willing to get to the end of the line. Go to the end of the line.
Go ahead. You can have one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up, because we don't want this
The
one.
other thing, okay, it'll be kind of quick. We just looked in operations yesterday, the facilities management, or whatever they call it now, the book with enrollment. One of the areas is program choice, right? Who has a different program choice. I think one thing that constituents are concerned about is making sure that you're not going to have every single program at every single school, but that every single high school and middle school have a relatively comparable number of computer offerings. Is there a way that we can add a section to programs of choice, or add it in there where you show what computer programs, because like we've talked about, there's so many different variations. It could be, Project Lead the Way, it could be a grant-based program, something, but where everyone can look at it and say, Hilton Head High has these computer programs, Whale Branch High has these computer programs, and everyone has the sense that the resources are being distributed equally.
I know Dr. Stratus may want to reference this as well, but one of the things we have been working on long term, and I totally agree with you, for our middle grades, it has been our goal in career and tech ed. Again, as I said, every middle school should have some type of STEM focus, and career and tech ed can leverage those state and federal funds with grades 6 through 8 to where, in my opinion, all middle grades need to have STEM, as well as some type of digital literacy. Again, going back to some of those key areas that are providing a little bit of exploratory and foundational before they start to really branch out in high school for more of what they're interested in pursuing. So whether it all falls under career and tech ed, it can, as far as every middle school offering innovators and computers. That particular course is a great exploratory course. Design and modeling is a great exploratory project lead the way gateway course. Ralph's shaking his head. There's a couple of courses I agree with you, and it's basically sending those teachers to training. They can be a math or science certified teacher, but again, it's having the teachers to be able to add those sections.
Well,
Dr. Stratos, did you want to add? Sorry.
I think Mrs. Boatwright had one more follow-up.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was
Ralph has his hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Let's go to him.
To piggyback on what you said, ma'am, even if you look at, of course, it has to be a K-12. I call it the hook. We have to hook them young to gain the interest with the problem-based teaching, where then when they get to middle school, they're like, oh, I remember when I did that in elementary school, et cetera, et cetera. We can't just start in high school and say, let's make computer science folks. It's got to start the hook. I used to be a recruiter, so I call it the hook. We have to hook them young and get their interest. Now that brings up as well, Project Lead the Way has a K-5 launch program. Dr. Flowers and I spoke about it yesterday, along with Dr. Appleby, because Mossy Oaks would like to go into it. As part of the grant, River Ridge Academy is the only standalone school that's done it without a grant, but based on our one-to-one initiative, and we were discussing with IT yesterday, they have to have iPads or tablets for the little people. I call them the little people, the elementary school kids. So that presents a new funding issue that we hadn't planned, but to expand it as far as infrastructure, we have to look at these things, because really we can put it in every single elementary school. So every elementary school student touches upon STEM through modules, medical, computer science. It's across the board. It's a beautiful thing. I'm a pro PLTW person, and so is Dr. Flowers and Miss Gilbert. But that's something, as we look at, if we want to expand, I firmly believe we have to come right from K right up to middle school. That's where we're deficient.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, I think sometimes what happens is people say, oh, there is all these programs have different names, all these classes, right? And different sort of emphasis. And so you can't compare apples to apples. And like Ms. Gilbert said, I think with cybersecurity, she said Whale Branch, Beaufort High, and Hilton Head High we have the Project Lead the Way 4th level cybersecurity, and Whale Branch has a cybersecurity, grant-based program. And so Bluffton doesn't. So what I'm saying was, with programs of choice, we have basically a spreadsheet with at this school, there are these programs at this school, and they're not all the same. But it gives a parent, if they have a child who wants to pursue, is a 6th grader and is really interested in computers, to say, okay, this is what's available at your school. Here are choice programs if your school doesn't have what your child's interested in, type of thing. Because we just don't have, we have that for our academic programs. We have it for Arts Infused. We have it for, ROTC, different things. I think that we should have some sort of a, what programs offered each school and school choice for families, as we have all these different resources we're kind of moving around.
All right, I'm going to throw one last thing in here so we can wrap this item up. I'm trying to sift through all the things that we've been talking about, looking for action items. And I'm not sure I see them. We all agree on a lot of things that should be done, but I'm trying to figure out what are the next steps? Who, as I asked before, who's leading what, and what can the board do to help accelerate that? We can't recruit teachers, which seems to be 50% of the problem at least. But what can we do?
If I may, Mr. Stribinger, Colonel Geyer hit on it, as we continue to look at space, learning spaces, in support of infrastructure, with and obviously Mr. Chohan, if he has thoughts on that, but to be able to, as we reconfigure existing spaces, what can that look like to be able to spread out and where in the existing buildings, if you're looking at media centers, if you're looking at things that to maximize space, that's going to be more forward thinking, with whether it's a career and tech ed focus within that space or a STEM makerspace type of approach, but infrastructure on, because it's not cheap. We're very fortunate. We maintain our federal parameters to have Perkins funding, and we're able to do a lot for our schools and teachers with that. And purchase what we need to purchase. We can't use bandwidth. We can't purchase Wi-Fi. That's a big no-no with federal funds. So things like that, to continue to look forward as to what would an ideal learning space look like that Colonel Geyer was referencing. Simulators. I do think simulators can work well when we're trying to do cybersecurity, cyber patriot, where you have these internal networks that's off the grid. But again, buying a server that's off the network would be some consideration. So just looking at infrastructure and how that would work for optimal teaching and learning for technology courses would be great.
Colonel Geyer?
And one last thing, Mr. Stribinger, my apologies, support and advocacy for, as Mr. Flowers mentioned, getting underway with prioritizing computer science standards as a whole framework. As I said, South Carolina is going to be releasing something over the next year. And if we're proactive on that, and from the board's perspective and this committee's perspective of being proactive with that, to as far as communications and promotion. And then to your last question, Dr. Stratos, I'm assuming it's your team that we're all collaborating under ISD along with Ms. Crosby and Mr. Chohan to make this happen, correct?
The answer to that is yes, Karen. It's a collaboration amongst us, and recognizing, listening to board preferences that they'd like to see as well for what our students are at the elementary and middle school, because it is actually being able to define the vision and then put those pieces in place, right? And that's where the board support comes, because your funding only goes so far. We can't push it down into the elementary.
David, what I recommend is that this briefing be given to the full board, probably at a work session, because there's going to be some discussion. I would add to this briefing the last chart saying this is what the board needs to do to support this effort, and bulletize it. Tell us what you think we should do.
I think that's a good idea. Ingrid?
Yeah, and I think, from a board perspective, we should give feedback from the community to the goals that you're laying out. I like your slide, what should technology look like in CTE classrooms? And then for me, it sounds like with, board feedback, coming up with goals, and then you guys, this is just a theory, David, say what you would need. You would need, simulator, you would need a server, you would need extra teachers, you would need contract teachers, you would need, et cetera. And then basically as a board, we just kind of check in, like, how are we doing on achieving these goals we talked about back in January of 2022? And let the staff come up with all their requirements and what they need in terms of money and resources.
Thank you. That sounds good. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, obviously a very valuable presentation. Again, a lot of neurons firing here. But this is complicated, very, very complicated. It's not unsolvable, but it has a lot of tentacles and a lot of ways to approach it. So thank you again, all of you. That was really good. Okay, let's move to the next item, which is an update on the external evaluation. Tanya, I know Mark is ill, but
I think he's back and all better. So I'm gonna let that lead.
I would just like to report that the RFP for the technology assessment services was finalized yesterday at 4 p.m. Many vendors have showed interest in this assessment, and at this time, I'm confident that we will meet our minimum preference of 3 submitted proposals. Our vendors have been very active in sending in questions regarding the assessments, and all of those can be viewed on the vendor registry website if you'd like to. We're hoping that we will have a chance to evaluate those proposals within the next couple of weeks to finalize it and get the ball rolling on this project.
all right. That sounds good. Any questions, Ingrid, or no? Okay. Thank you, Mark. Student broadband access initiatives.
We are still continuing to meet with our local ISPs and providers. Next week, we will be meeting with T-Mobile on one of their new broadband initiatives called the Project 10 Million. They are working with many communities and school districts around the country to try to get better broadband access. We are a little concerned that it could be more focused on the MiFis, where we already have MiFis, and we know that is not the ultimate goal that we would like to see for our students in the long term. But we continue to meet with our partners and see how they can expand our vision on this topic.
Ingrid? You're muted, Ingrid.
Sorry, my screen was dancing around. On the MiFi thing, you know, I don't think that that's going to meet the minimum requirements for ARPA funding, or, you know, I don't know if that's 120 or if that's 25.3 or what. But, you know, we have MiFi, so I'm not sure if that's something that we want to fold into the schools' broadband initiatives. But I do think that one thing that the schools should be doing is figuring out what our broadband problem is. What percentage of students don't have access? It doesn't have to be exact, but a good estimate of what percentage of students don't have access to broadband and where those students are. Because I think that we're not defining the problem from the school district perspective. And we're kind of jumping in with these all this ARPA funding and county funding and town funding, and everyone wants to do it. And I don't know if we understand exactly the gravity of the problem for school-aged residents. Can we do so? So I guess my question is there a way that we can initiate some sort of a project to get a sense of where kids are and how much broadband they do or do not have? That was awkwardly worded. I'm sorry. Where we need to find more broadband, I guess.
We continue to ask on our registration documentation for our families to tell us their needs or what they have when it comes to broadband. But unfortunately, in this day and age, we are still not getting all the data we would like. We are still having families tell us that they have broadband just because they have it on a cell phone or they have a weak connection. And even though each year we do add more questions to it to try to get a better definition from it, we are still having trouble getting that answer from our students and their parents.
We spoke about this before, and we were going to refine the questions to try to get it more accurate. And it sounds like you're doing that, but I'm kind of privy to everybody else's data, and our data is the best. Even though it has flaws, it's better than the data that other people are looking at. So we need to get hooked into all those other folks. does seem to be some countywide initiative I was just told about yesterday. And they want to invite us to join. And I guess it's the county, and they're trying to figure out how to spend money. But for some reason, and they don't have trouble with that usually. For some reason, we're not included. So I'm going to try to get us included into that group, because I do believe our data is much better than everyone else's, even with the flaws. All right, Ingrid, you still have your hand up?
Just as a follow-up, I want to say, not only do we need to know, and I agree, I think we did talk about refining the questions, but we've got to, I mean, in other words, I don't think that in 2022, we should say, well, we couldn't really get the right answer, because what we have to do is figure out not only who has it or who doesn't have it, but, you know, who can afford it? Because I think that's another issue that's being overlooked. You may have broadband at home, but if you're not paying the bill, or if you can't afford broadband. So there's two questions, right? Who actually has high-speed broadband available? Because and we should be able to find this out just from talking to the Office of Broadband. There are a large number of people who actually just don't have the wires running out to their home, and find out, you know, where those are, where those pockets of access are. And then how many people in our schools maybe have the infrastructure, but aren't able to afford it. Because I think we really, as we look at this learning loss, we really need to figure out how to extend the learning day. And the easiest way to do that is to give kids a laptop, to give them access to these scholastic programs, and to have them doing that, you know, at home with their parents. That would be the most ideal scenario.
Okay, so
I guess,
the action item coming out of this, I think, is to get our data much better if we can.
And I guess my question is, are we not able to look at it again until we start re-enrolling? Is that the only place where we can get this data?
That's usually where we get the most accurate assessment of the data. When we send stuff home throughout the year, we really don't get the true picture. When the parents are dedicated enough to fill out our registration, we seem that like that's where we get our most accurate information from.
And then I guess we also have usage statistics too, right? So we know who's using their laptops after hours and who's not, don't we?
We do, but there's some disparities there. A lot of times we have students that leave school and go home to a family member's, maybe grandma's or grandpa's house that has internet access, but then the rest of the time they're at their house without internet access. So there's a lot of data points that really don't get captured fully. That makes it a little bit tougher question.
All right, yeah, as I said, the only action item I see coming out of that is for us to get better data. And the other action item is for me to get us included in this new county-wide initiative. Thank you, Mark. Now we get to discussion. Overview of the committee mission. And that'll probably be as complicated as our discussions have been up to this point, because there are many, many, many pieces. Ingrid, I'm going to let you take the lead on this because you've done the most work on it.
Oh, thank you. Do you guys hear the somebody?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. It was just, I hate it when you get that echo. Yeah, I've been looking at, you know, what other committees are doing, school boards are doing as far as technology. And like I said, I do have a background in recently in technology information management, but I'm looking at our OE, and I know that we are supposed to be really tied to the OEs. And then we had that meeting with Peggy Torrey where they were like, well, you don't have to be so specific. And so I started broadening my search outside of the OEs. And what I think we have with our OE 17 administrative technology, it's a fairly limited scope. And I kind of looked at, and I sent this to David and to Richard, you know, Dr. Rodriguez and likes that plan, do, act, check model. A lot of technology companies use it when they implement new technology. And so I kind of broke ROEs into what fell into the plan, act, do, and check category, and most of them are monitoring OEs. They're about, the operational expectation is that Beaufort County School District technology will sort of make sure that everything's doing what it's supposed to be doing. What I think is lacking in the OE, and I think the board should have some level of input as, community members, is sort of strategy and vision, just like with that presentation we got from Mrs. Gilbert we should be talking about what does technology look like in the schools now, 5 years from now, planning for it, budgeting for it, and engaging the community, stakeholders, et cetera, and sort of moving from this very limited sort of what sort of support services do we offer in the technology framework, and kind of looking at a holistic bird's eye view of how are we using technology? Because one thing is we spend a lot of money on technology, and it's an increasingly important part of education. And so I sent that little breakdown to the other committee members. And I also took from a study out of UC Irvine about education technology leadership that said there were like 6 main areas that education technology leadership should be invested in. And it was strategy and vision, budget, external relations. I don't have it right in front of me because I wasn't planning on taking the lead. Organizational processes. And I kind of looked at, there's a lot of things I think that, like with Miss Gilbert's presentation, that is more of a large, not in the weeds, but 30,000 degree view of technology and where it's going. And it involves multiple departments. So personally, I think we need to either rethink our OE, do something different as far as the mission of the OE, of the technology committee. Is that what you were looking for, David? Sorry.
That's exactly it. And I know that you are so involved that you really didn't have to study to tell us what your thoughts were. I know it's part of you. I only have one nit question, and that is, would you send that attachment to the rest of the folks on the committee here? Or?
Yeah, I just on it. The reason I said to you guys, I didn't have time to make it, a story. I figured I could have it while we were talking about it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be pretty. But my only question is, I was taught it was plan, do, check, act. You have plan, do, act, check. Did it change?
Well, the reason is I started off with, it might have changed. No, it didn't change. You're absolutely right.
Okay.
With plan, they say plan, design, implement, maintain as the traditional role of an information technology management person. But in computer software, in software applications, it's usually plan, design, implement, and then basically get feedback. That's more of the agile management philosophy. So you kind of see how it works, and you go back and see if you need to tweak it. So I tried to make it match up with that. So I think I got check and act out of order, but you get the idea.
Yeah. It just, it raises a flag for those of us who have been inundated in training on TQ. And there was one point I know that you and I have talked about that that I don't think got emphasized too much, and that was somehow making sure that we are client-centered, that our testing is client-centered, that it's ease of use is the important part.
End user design, yeah.
End user design. And somehow we want to work that into being one of the top priorities for any implementation. And the other thing is, going back to a motion that passed a couple of years ago, is we don't purchase anything without articulating ahead of time what the expected results are going to be, and then we monitor those results. And I know the motion passed, but I'm not sure it ever got any traction. So that was another piece. And I think maybe the next, I won't be on the next technology committee. I can't be. But I think that's probably the first thing the next technology committee should do is get those boundaries locked in.
And I guess one of my questions would be to the other committee members, you and Colonel Geyer, do we want to stay? Is this an OE thing? This is where I get confused, and I've kind of given up because I thought I had a handle on OEs, and now I feel like I don't. But do we want to stick with the OE format and basically say OE 17 is what we've got, and we have to figure out how to make it work? Because as I pointed out in that document, which I will send out, I just felt like it lacked some of the things we're talking about. It's student-centered. It's more about it doesn't have as much of a goal-centered approach, and it also doesn't focus as much on like transparency, which I don't think is a problem. I just think it's something that could be improved on. So I don't know if we want to stick with the OE 17 and just try to contort a mission statement into the OE that we currently have. If we want to take OE 17 back to the policy committee and rework it, or if we just want to say OE 17 is one aspect of what the technology committee can do, and here's a mission statement.
Go ahead, Dick.
Thank you. I spent a lot of time working on the finance committee, a draft that I've sent out to the rest of the finance committee and will be discussed at our meeting in an hour or so, about OEs and how they relate to the PEs. And I believe we've gotten this kind of mixed up. And the OEs should be a narrative. It should be long-term goals, near-term goals, how we're going to measure, or what we're going to measure, what products that we see. And then that goes to the staff, to the superintendent and staff, and the superintendent and staff develop the PEs, performance expectations. And that's where the details are, not in the OEs. We don't have a staff. We don't do the background. We say, this is what we want in a macro sense. And now we've given you our view. Now you come back with the PEs, with what you as a staff are going to do to accomplish what we have stated in the operational expectations. And that's where the detail is. That's where the goals are. That's where the measurement matrix is. It's not in the OEs. It shouldn't be in the OEs. It should be in the PEs. And then that comes back to the board, and then the board looks at it and said, okay, but you forgot such and such. You need to go back and make sure you say exactly what you're going to do, and goes into the PEs, not in the OEs, in the PEs. It's a difference between the board mission as a oversight of the institution, the operation. The institution is the one that has to meet the board's requirements. And you don't want to be so specific in your OEs that you take away the innovation, the staffing, the coordination that's necessary to have specific action items to accomplish what the board wants. So we're going to talk about this more in Finance Committee about, because I kind of rewrote the OEs and as a start, and I still think they're too specific. I think, for example, the OE for finance say you will have a well-run fiscal policy. You will pass all your audits, and that's about it. And then you tell me how you're going to become a well-run fiscal operation. You tell me, staff. I really think that we've gotten way out of line in our OE. I think, and that's a philosophical thing, but it came from that training that we had. And then I went back and I looked at guidance that I've gotten from boards of trustees boards of governors, from other organizations, and I saw the big difference between what they put out for what we're putting out as far as specificity. So it's a fundamental issue that I think we'll be discussing for some time.
I just have one question, Dick. When you say PEs, do you mean the interpretations?
Yes, it's the interpretation of the OEs. That's
right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, because PE is kind of a specialized understanding for those that have been around for a while. It was like the predecessor to the OE called PEs. So I think you're referring to the interpretation, and I'm with you 100%. With you 100%.
Are the PEs. This is the performance.
One of the advantages of the current OE with all those specifics is it does give the operations people a heads up. This is what we're looking for. We're looking for you to come up with this level of detail. And the downside to the broad approach is that they interpret it, they come to us, and we say, as you point out, and we say then, well, you forgot this, and you forgot this, and you forgot this. So the current ones really do give everybody a heads up so that we don't have to go through that extra step. But it is philosophical.
For example, when there's a motion made at the board meeting to do X, that doesn't get written into the OEs.
Right.
That goes to the PEs. And the motion's been made, you should come back with PE XYZ, and this is what you're going to do to accomplish what we stated in our motion. Now, when we rewrite the OEs, we may say in general terms, we've added something, but you don't get specific. They get specific back to us, and we decide, is that specific enough? Yes or no? If it's not, go back, give it another shot, staff. We should not be trying to fill up our OEs with all kinds of specific things. It should be a macro strategic view, not a tactical view, a strategic view. It's an intent. What is the intent of the board? And I go back to my military planning process. We always had a commander's intent. And that's what you base your plan on. What plan, how you're going to meet that intent. That's the specific.
Right. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I just like the fact that we can give some specifics ahead of time so that we skip that you come to us and we correct it step. And I'm sure there are ways to do that without putting it in the OE. And you and I have exchanged emails on this topic before, so I'm not going to bore everybody with our conversations. Ingrid?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to me, since I'm relatively new and never had to deal with PEs, my interpretation of this is that from a distance, that there was so much distrust between the board and the district and the community. And so then there was this overcorrection where it was like, okay, we have to know everything you're doing all the time. So kind of like when, your kid lies to you and then you get a lot more interested in, where they are and what they're doing. I think that trust has largely been restored, in my opinion. I think the community is very highly regards the district administration right now. I think that the board's managed to, stumble forward fairly well. So now, to me, when I think about OEs, what I think about is I don't want to micromanage staff because they know more about this stuff than I do by a factor of 1,000. I don't want to be punitive and be like, where is this report? How did you maximize the E-rate spending? I want to look big picture. I want to say this is what the community is looking for. And I know personally that my community, my constituents are very interested in technology. What are we doing? How are we teaching this next generation of kids? How are we using it? So to me, I would like to see OEs be more focused on sort of what support can we as the board give to the district? What to me, I see that my role as a board member is to be sort of a vessel for community interest. So we want to provide the technology committee with resources. We want to provide the technology committee with support, because we're hoping that if we do that, we will be able to achieve these goals. And these are the goals. And then when we circle back and say, how are we doing on these goals? For example, like, let's say the hiring more contracted teachers. Couple meetings later, say, where are we on that? Well, these are the, this is as far as we've gotten. And we just kind of keep pushing the ball forward to the ultimate goal of what I think the community wants. And if the community disagrees with us on what we think that, the district should be pointing itself towards, then they elect somebody else. So it's a self-writing system. But I feel like the OEs became punitive. They became, we don't trust you, so we want to show us all your work because we think you might cheat. And I don't feel that anymore. And I don't think the community feels that anymore. We've gotten great audits, et cetera, et cetera. So I think now we should have a more fun approach of what are we doing and where do you guys want to go with this? And how can we as board members support you? And then on the reverse, go back to our communities and prove that this is what we're doing. These are the advances that our school district is making. So I don't see that OE 17 does that. I think OE 17 is show your work. I would like to come up with a happier version of OE 17 that is more forward thinking and more exciting.
I don't think you're going to get any disagreement on that. Yeah, I understand what you're saying about the distrust. And I'm not sure it was so much distrust, at least from my perspective, as it is saying, you know what, these are the questions we're going to ask you. So I take a different look. I agree there was distrust, and micromanagement is one way to get around that. But from my perspective, any heads up we can give people on the questions we're going to ask you when you bring this forward is a good thing. But we're getting very philosophical, and we don't need to do that in the technology committee.
Technology is so philosophical.
Oh yeah, it is. It is so broad. It bleeds into everything, which is one of the problems we have with getting our mission straight. I still think a mission statement needs to be developed. I think that would be a good thing to refine everybody's thinking. And of course, we want input from Tanya and Mark on that too, so we get agreement on the mission of it, in case we overlook something. So we've eaten up an hour and a half. I think we could talk about this probably for another hour. But my takeaways is that we are going to recommend, or we're recommending actually, that Karen Gilbert's presentation be given to the full board. And the agenda committee is going to have to realize, I think, that there's going to be a couple of hours of discussion probably on that. But it's, as I said before, such an excellent presentation. I mean, it just touches on all the areas where everybody's got questions. And it opens some areas up where we weren't even thinking about. So it's just a super presentation. I think it should be given to the full board and the public. So that's a takeaway from this one. And then I think the next meeting of the technology committee should focus on the mission and get that straight. Okay.
Questions. When you say give it to the full board, do you want it to go on Tuesday's meeting under committee meeting, or should wait until the work session?
I'm thinking work session, my thought, and that is because I've kind of made a rule in my mind that anything that's informational and is going to have some discussion should be done in a work session.
I like that.
So I'm thinking work session.
Okay.
Go get him, Mr. Chairman.
I think we're going to have like a 5-day work session.
The staff's super excited about it.
But that was my only thought on some way to keep the board meetings within their boundaries, to move informational stuff and discussion stuff into the work sessions so we have more time. All right. I think we've covered everything.
Future topics?
I'm sorry that chihuahuas are barking. I didn't hear that.
Future topics?
Well, I gave the first one, which is get the mission straight. I think that's the first thing that the committee should focus on. Get it straight.
Okay.
Because I think Ingrid is right that we anchored on the OE because we need to anchor on something. Okay, let's make sure that we have a mission that fully covers what we're doing and sets our boundaries, because we can go everywhere. Technology can go everywhere. We want to keep boundary on it. So I think that's really the topic for the next technology meeting. But I'm only one voice, so
That's good.
good with you. Good with you, Ingrid.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, then we need a motion to adjourn, I think.
So moved.
Second.
And I third that. So that's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
Second.
Mark. Thank you, Tanya.